Hey everybody. Today I thought I'd do an impromptu, unplanned live stream to just talk about podcast editing. Give me a sec. Sorry, realized I did not have my mic quite set up right, but there's a few things that I've seen this week that I just wanted to talk about, and if any of you have questions, I'll be answering those too. So I had a good consulting call with another editor yesterday, and one of the things we talked about was getting into video editing. And one of the things we talked about is how podcasting, it's no longer its own thing. It's not just podcasting anymore. As much as podcasters want to cling to that idea that podcasting is their special thing, it's become one part of the content creation machine. If we think about it, many podcasters, they're now using video in some form along with their audio content. They're probably using social media. A lot of them are using blogs and transcripts on their websites for SEO. So the reality is podcasters, they're now part of the content creator space. They're not their own thing. So as editors, we need to accept this and just start looking at what skills we need to add in order to provide the best value to our clients. I think about the podcast editors group, podcast editors club, whatever the Facebook group is called, and we're not allowed to talk about content creation or even equipment. So you have this huge group that essentially has its head buried in the sand about what's actually going on out there in this space. Or maybe they just want to turn a blind eye to it. I'm not really sure. I mean, many of these editors, they dug their heels in on the podcasting is only audio hill, and now they're sort of scrambling to learn how to edit video because their clients are asking for it. So that's kind of how you end up in a situation like this, where we've got someone posting, for those working with another person who edits the video while you do the audio, or vice versa. A client is let's start that over. A client is looking for efficiencies between me, the podcast editor, and her video editor. Same recording, just edited more for the YouTube audience. We are not taking the audio from the edited video, but rather editing separately and using different editing software. She, my client, wants to see if there are any efficiencies we can come up with to save either me or him the video editor time. My initial thought is to have him communicate what he's removing, such as the video editor can make note of sections he removes, not crutches and stuff, but rather full sentences and sections, either using the raw transcript or in a way that will help me find it in the unedited recording, or run a transcript when he's finished and compare it to the original transcript using something like Draftable. I guess we could use a tool like notetracks.com or Frame.io too. So for those who have edited the same content separately for each medium, what efficiency steps do you have? Okay, so my first thought is that this video editor, or actually, let me go ahead and read the other part of this. This part gives some context to the situation. The video is being edited for YouTube, which involves a lot of cuts that sound unnatural to a listening audience. My client received lots of negative feedback over the past year, both when we did audio first and tried to make the video the same and vice versa. Since her audience is 20 listeners for every one viewer, she decided the audio version has to be great. And since she doesn't want my video light version, which is 30% better than a Zoom recording with no editing, but nowhere near the production her video editor can do, we edit them separately. We're talking about a top 2% podcast, so the extra effort isn't wasted. So the first thing that comes to my mind, my first thought, is that this video editor, they must be a little bit clueless. They don't really know what they're doing. They're either someone who learned how to edit video using, like, for short form content, shorts and reels, stuff like that, or they're probably using something like Descript and they don't know enough to care or know how to fix the bad edits. Not sure what happened there, but not really sure how to fix these things, the bad edits. And the second thing that goes through my head is that this process that's been outlined is going to be pretty convoluted. It seems like there's too many cooks in the kitchen. I really feel like someone needs to step in to be the project manager here and really think out this process and build it out to be efficient. The only reason they're kind of in this predicament, though, is the video editor, they're not a competent audio editor, or I guess really even a competent video editor. And we have an audio editor who doesn't edit video. So they have to hire two people to do the job that, in a lot of times, one person would do. So there's already going to be some inefficiencies. That's made worse because the video editor can't really edit the video well enough to be used for the audio. And that's the first part of this. And I'm kind of thrown off by the comment that this video is being edited for YouTube, which involves a lot of cuts that sound unnatural. Like, this is accepted, that this is the style or what is needed for YouTube videos. I'm wondering, why aren't you speaking up and letting the client know that the video editing is not helping their YouTube numbers? Should we really just sit there and not say anything to the client about why they might be receiving negative feedback about the video in the first place? If this were me, and again, let me reiterate, if this was me, my first goal, my first step is to streamline this process. I'm going to probably use a tool like Descript because it works well for this type of workflow. The client can go through and just go through the transcript and essentially strike out the sections of content they don't want. Now, both the audio and video editors, they've got the same rough cut from which we can do our own thing. And as part of that process, the audio editor would ideally clean up and mix the full audio so it can be synced up with the video and Descript, so everybody's working with the same audio quality. This sort of streamlines the process for everybody, and the client, they're removing what they don't want from the transcript. From there, the audio editor can bring that timeline into their DAW. The video editor, they can export that into their NLE or whatever they're using for each person's specialized edits. This should mean fewer revisions for both editors because we've already cut the main content that will need to be removed. And we've got a comment from Matthew. Let me add this in. Ooh, that doesn't work so well, so let's just move this. Agreed. Splitting the tasks between two focuses must have a managing process on top. That's the thing. The more people that are involved, you need to have someone acting as the project manager. And in this instance, the podcaster or the client themselves doesn't know enough about all of the work that's being done to really be able to manage that process. That she's asking the audio editor, hey, do you know how to fix this up? How to make this more a better process? But in an ideal world, the client would go and find a better editor, a better video editor rather, because you want someone who can do a good job with the video, because that would streamline the process even more, because now you're able to build a process where the video editor does the first pass edit. Then once that's approved, the audio is going to be handed over to then the audio will be handed over. Sorry. Not sure what's going on with my voice right now, but what I was saying is once the video edit's been done and approved, the audio is exported and handed over to the audio editor to finish their edit. But if I was looking for an even more, I guess, an even more ideal world, I would hire a competent editor who could handle both the audio and the video editing, so that now we have more consistency, since only one editor is working on the content. There's only one point of contact for the client and the editor. This means less time spent on QC by the client. So the point here is that we're only making things more difficult, more challenging for ourselves and for our clients by not being able to do or be a one-stop shop for them. So wrong direction. Okay, so kind of along the same lines as what I was just talking about. Our clients, they're going to be more likely to look to us for related things like strategy, equipment, marketing, like the situation we were just talking about. The audio editor is not being looked at as someone the client is having conversations with about why the show has 20 listens per one view, or why the video version is not performing well. In order to answer this, we need to understand YouTube. What works, what doesn't, how YouTube viewers are different from podcast listeners, and how to develop a strategy for success using video. If we look at ourselves simply as audio podcast editors, we're going to quickly find ourselves with a smaller pool of clients, and probably will be losing some clients too. And I've been saying this for years. before video podcasting blew up this year, that we really should be looking at ourselves as service providers to content creators, not just podcast editors, not audio podcast editors, not video podcast editors, but we should be looking at ourselves as someone who provides services to content creators, because that's where everything's going. Podcast managers, they were already set up for these types of changes in the industry because they've been doing it all along. They've been doing all of the things. They've been so far ahead of many audio only editors. Need help with social media? They've got you covered. Need help booking guests or creating artwork or ideas, whatever it is, your podcast manager has you covered. As podcasters, their plates are growing even more full with all of these new things, like putting video into the equation and shorts and all of that. They're probably more likely to compromise on audio quality a little bit in order to hire someone who maybe might not be the best audio editor, but they're able to take more of those tasks off their plate than just the editing and maybe using AI to write show notes and descriptions. Or really, that person could be you if you upskill. So for anybody watching, if you're watching the replay, what are your thoughts if you're an editor? What do you think about upskilling or partnering up with others in order to offer more value to your clients as their needs grow? Or if you're a podcaster who's watching this and you're more are you more interested in hiring someone who can only edit your audio, someone who can edit audio and video? Or are you more interested in someone who can essentially handle everything for you? And more importantly, how much are you willing to pay for each of those types of services? Something to think about, and hopefully we get some people dropping some comments in, whether it's during this live stream or during the replay. But let's start a conversation here. Okay, so moving on. This was something I ran across the other day, and can't remember where I saw it, but the original post was the person was new to podcasting and just asking for some help with their levels because they look like this top image here. You can see everything's pegged. True peak is well over 0. Just everything looks bad here. And they outlined their process and got this first response. Audio engineer here. Don't use normalization. You're talking about LUFS and your true peak. When recording, record your audio between -18 dB and -20 dB LUFS. That's a great place to start for mixing and pretty standard. Use pre-fader metering. Your first compressor should be taming only your biggest peaks, and you should see 1 to 3 dB of reduction there. Your next compressor should recover that. Use the fader to get the levels you want going into your mix bus. Okay, so we get that. Then later in the thread, the audio engineer dropped this little nugget. In audio mixing, you don't do all your audio work on the individual channel. Typically, the end of your mix has additional EQ, compression, and other things added to glue your mix together. Then it goes to mastering. If you're doing all this yourself, it's fine to do the work in the same session, and I do when mixing in Fairlight. For anybody watching, Fairlight is the kind of built-in DAW in DaVinci. So when mixing dialogue, I process each speaker, then send those to a mix bus, then send that to a master. Here's a podcast I mixed and edited for YouTube delivery as an example. So there's a lot there to unpack. And I mean, the first thing here is, and I don't know why exactly, but I always get frustrated when people come in and just kind of say, hey, I'm an expert, and start making blanket statements like this, which I know they're usually coming from a place of experience and wanting to help, but they tend to forget what it's like to be new to something. And I mean, the main takeaway of this is he's saying don't use normalization. Later, he went on and said that using normalization can cause distortion, squash dynamics, and something like it's essentially a super compressor. And none of this is actually true, but it could send someone who is brand new to this type of work down this rabbit hole of, oh, I can't use normalization because an audio engineer, they know what they're talking about. They told me not to do it. And that can create a lot of frustration, some bad habits. And the thing is, a lot of this advice is coming from mixing for music, engineering for music, and when we work with dialogue, we have different needs. Most of the editors I've spoken to don't use such a convoluted mix setup, and I think many of us are using much simpler means of mixing our content. I can't speak for everybody, but from the people I've talked to, most of us are not going to these lengths when we mix. I mean, thinking about it, I guess if you use loudness normalization and your mix is too quiet and you're trying to bump it up to -16 or even worse, like they were talking about in this thread, -14, because that's what YouTube wants. Look, dialogue should never be -14 LUFS. It just shouldn't. Don't try to aim for that. But you might get some limiting if you're trying to push it that loud and your mix is too quiet. But that's really more of a byproduct of a bad mix than it is from using loudness normalization. I mean, one of the most important things I learned early on is that we have to meet our audience where they are. We have to be able to look at posts on social media and see where these people are when we're answering them. I have to thank Rosemary for that, because when I was planning out my editing course, I'd asked her for some feedback on my plans because she'd taken some other editing courses and wasn't happy with them. So I'd basically had a conversation with her, asking her why she wasn't happy with them and what she would be looking for. She told me two things that really stuck with me. The first is that I don't want to be an audio engineer. I just want to know how to make things sound good. And the other one was that, remember, not everyone has the experience that you do. Many of us are brand new or just starting out. So using a bunch of technical jargon is just going to lose us. And these are things that I've known for a long time, having trained people for so long. And a lot of those people didn't have any experience in anything we were doing. But I needed that reminder because it's so easy to forget when you aren't actually talking to someone face to face. But when it comes to audio, the big thing to remember is there's not a single right way to do things. There really aren't many hard and fast rules that apply across the board. There will be times when something like Adobe Voice Enhance is actually the best choice for cleaning up audio. It's unlikely, but if your audio is that bad, it might just be the only thing that can save the day. And in this case, we're looking at a situation where, let me take that back. With what we're talking about here with loudness normalization, there's nothing wrong with using loudness normalization. I think most of us are using it at some point in our process. And if we're not, it's because we don't know that we should be, or that we've been mixing stuff for so long, we don't need it. But there's two places where I tend to use loudness normalization. Either at the beginning of the process or as the last step. I mean, Hindenburg applies loudness normalization upon import, and it's never caused any noticeable artifacts or negative attributes. You would not hear a difference between the raw audio and what it sounds like in the DAW, because all Hindenburg is doing is raising or reducing the volume of the entire file so that it hits that target loudness. It's not doing any other processing. And I know many of us do or have used loudness normalization, either in our DAW when we bounce the audio or in RX as part of the process, and we do it without any kind of ill consequences. So once we move past that whole part about the loudness normalization, there is some good advice here. The record between -18 and -12 dB, that is really good advice, because that's most in line with 0 on analog equipment. That's where we generally want to start when we're setting up a mix. It's a good place to set our levels when we're recording. If we're using any plugins that are kind of built off of or referencing analog style circuits, which is probably most of them, this is the range where they perform their best. You push them past this and you tend to maybe get some saturation, which is something we don't tend to want with dialogue. But then we do get into this part later on where he's talking about not doing everything in the individual channel, and that we should be using a bus with even more processing to glue everything together. The first thing that goes through my head is, in an interview, what exactly is there to glue together? This sounds like music. It sounds like it's advice coming from someone who mixes music as their primary audio work. But in an interview style show, there are little to no elements that need to be glued together. The vast majority of everything in the episode is a single voice at a time. Maybe in a narrative style show, but none of that really matters because that's how he wants to approach his mixes. That's not going to be the same way that I approach my mixes. It's not going to be the same way you approach your mixes. So that's the main takeaway. We all find our way. We all have our own approaches. One isn't necessarily better than the other. All that matters is the results that we're getting. So if you're watching this, what do you do when you mix episodes? Do you use buses? Do you try to glue things together? Do you try to keep things simple? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, so let's look at this new plugin, Cedar, or I guess it's not really new, but it's a newish plugin from Cedar Audio. It's the second version, I guess. And Cedar Audio, if you're unfamiliar, a few years ago they released VoicEx, which I tested. It was a really good noise and reverb reduction plugin. It was really the best at the time, but it also was $1,000. Very few people who aren't making a living off really high-end dialogue production could afford $1,000 for a plugin like this. But with the new version, VoicEx 2, it seems like at some point Cedar Audio has changed their philosophy. They're now selling their plugins individually, and they've brought the prices down. So VoicEx, it's now $325. It's still pricey, but it's not that far out of line with DX Revive Pro, and I think Waves, whatever their DX D-Reverb thing, whatever it's called, I think it's in a similar price range. But from using them previously, okay, let's not zoom that out. But from using VoicEx and DX Revive Pro 2, since those are the two that are probably the closest together, here's how I describe them. VoicEx, I would probably say, is the better noise and reverb reduction plugin. It tends to handle that a little bit better than DX Revive Pro. It does noise reduction a lot better than DX Revive Pro. For me, noise reduction was always the weak point of DX Revive Pro, but, and there's always a but with these things, DX Revive Pro has other tricks up its sleeve that makes it more valuable, like the spectral restore stuff that it does. Not only does it reduce noise and reverb, but it does clean up the audio to make it sound more studio-like. So if you're, and I just did a video of this with AirPod audio recordings, it does a pretty decent job of filling in those missing frequencies, so it sounds a lot better than it does on its own. But one thing that VoicEx has done that nothing else has done is it does a pretty good job of removing mic rustle that you might get when, let's say, someone is using corded earbuds and have it dangling there and their hairs keeps rustling over the mic. VoicEx does a pretty good job of that. So let me grab my headphones. And test this out. Okay, so let's hear the raw audio. Bring up the plugin.
The first thing I want to say, though, Brian, is you are not the only person who is dealing with this at all. This is very common, what you're talking about.
Okay, so we've got some reverb on there. We don't really have any noise that I hear or see. But this is a two-knob plugin. Voice controls. The way this plugin works is it analyzes the file and basically classifies things as either voice or not voice. So the voice knob controls the level of the voice. Noise is your noise reduction knob. So we'll adjust that as we play it back, see if we can get some of that reverb taken out.
The first thing I want to say, though, Brian, is you are not the only person who is dealing with this at all. This is very common, what you're talking about. People who've been in business for decades run into the same issues you're talking about. So it's not a Brian specific issue that's going on.
Okay, it's taking some of it out. It's not doing a great job, but those really short echoes, early reflections that you get in rooms like this, those are the hardest to completely dial out. So I'm not too concerned about that. Let's move to this one.
We were focused on really changing the way that organizations protected themselves with respect to application security. We saw pretty...
Okay, so this one has a ton of reverb. And if I remember correctly, if we used RX to first take out the reverb, we would then find a really loud HVAC system running. But let's see what we can do.
We were focused on really changing the way that organizations protected themselves with respect to application security. We saw a pretty big gap in the market where there was an opportunity to get closer to protecting applications and APIs by being directly in the...
So that does a pretty good job given how much reverb there was. Let's toggle it back and
really
forth.
Changing the way that organizations protected themselves with respect to application security. We saw a pretty big gap in the market where there was an opportunity to get closer to protect.
To me, that's definitely usable. Let's move down here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, the background is basically...
Okay, so we've got some noise here. We've got some gating. Let's see what we can do. Let's start here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, the background is basically probably similar to a lot of people who are doing audio.
So what I hear here is it's not only getting the noise that we heard in between words, but it's doing a really good job of killing that noise when he's speaking.
Is basically probably similar to a lot of people who are doing audio editing.
Let's listen to this one.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, not that. We don't want to hear everything.
And this is where it gets really fascinating because the energy system requires...
So here we can hear there's a ton of noise. I mean, it's so bad you would think that this was made up. Someone has a clean recording and just played white noise over it. But I guarantee you that is not the case here. But let's see how VoicEx handles this.
And this is where it gets really fascinating because the energy system requires all sources of energy. And if you look at the energy demand and the profile we're short on energy.
So that does a really good job. And I try to set it to where I get the most noise and or reverb reduction, because I don't want to crank it all the way if I'm getting just minimal returns. I don't want artifacts, but even when this has been run at high, at max, I'm not hearing much in the way of artifacts.
Demand and the profile, we're short on energy. And then we start taking certain supplies.
But actually, this one I think is a really good example for showing what DX Revive 2 or DX Revive Pro can do. So I'll just go ahead and put it on Studio 3.
If you look at the energy demand and the profile, we're short on energy. And then we start taking certain supplies offline and then signaling you don't want certain supplies because of the emissions factor. You then create a consequence.
Let's try Studio 2.
You don't want certain supplies because of the emissions factor. You then create a consequence.
Studio 1.
You don't want certain supplies because of the emissions factor. You don't want certain supplies because of the emissions factor.
This would be a situation where it's kind of user's choice, but you can hear how the EQ, low frequency restore, and high frequency restore are really helping to bring back some of those missing frequencies, so it's not nearly as thin as when we're using VoicEx.
Want certain supplies because of the emissions factor. You then create a consequence of you're not going to have reliable energy.
So either one is going to do well here. It just depends what you're looking for. And let's go to, if you've watched any of my noise reduction videos, you know what clip this is.
No, I think it's, no, well, I think you hear it, but in the congressional side, I mean, I think the administration has been strangely silent about it. I mean, it's very important in our relationship with India, but they don't really talk about it. They just want to talk about, net zero carbon. And I think for the Indians, this is very important. And, I could see at our conference in India, they were surprised. They heard about it from the US companies, but they didn't.
First thing here, this is why you always want guests or yourself to have laptops plugged in. This is what happens when you run a laptop, especially an older laptop, off a battery. Eventually, it starts to overheat and needs to turn the fans on. And as you could hear here, it not only turned on, but also changed speeds as he was talking. This was a very challenging piece of audio to clean up in RX, but let's see how Cedar Audio handles it.
No, I think it's, no, well, I think you hear it, but in the congressional side, I mean, I think the administration has been strangely silent about it. I mean, it's very important in our relationship with India, but they don't really talk about it. They just want to talk about, net zero carbon. And I think for the Indians, this is very important. And, I could see at our conference in India, they were surprised. They heard about it from the US.
It's not 100% perfect. You can still hear a little bit of the ghosting there, but it's quite a bit better than what we had before. So my takeaway, it's the wrong screen. Let's go back this way. That's not right. There we go. So the main takeaway I get here is, I think if it was me and you have one choice, I would definitely recommend DX Revive Pro. It's just a much more universal tool. It has a lot more it's just more versatile. VoicEx, it's a good secondary tool to have in your tool belt for the times where maybe you don't need to repair the audio, but you just need to remove noise and reverb. That makes it a really good choice. So, as someone who edits for others, I find that it's just worth having more than one choice available to you. You never know which one is going to perform best. But I haven't had any comments, so I think we're going to wrap things up here. I hope you found this helpful or useful. If you're watching the replay, leave your comments below, and I love seeing them. And thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.